What's going on? It's Trending Story. If it's your first time here and you want to find out new facts that will definitely make you smarter and more well informed, make sure to subscribe and active the notifications bell so you don't miss anything.
The woman was pregnant, but when the old man clapped, something unthinkable happened. An amazing story about how a lonely grandfather managed to protect a poor girl from her fellow fugitive prisoners. The old man, Pivonik, likes to sit in the courtyard of his wooden house on his favorite chair, drink tea there, and read Russian novels, especially those related to classical literature. The grandfather has retired, and he finds nothing to do but sit alone in his beautiful house outside the village and spend his time reading and watching newspapers. The grandfather was keen to take care of the garden of the house, as he was used to plant roses and flowers in it. And he also took care of the fruit trees that he planted in his orchard. And when he harvested the crop, he would share the crop with his neighbors. So his livelihood is good, and he does not need to sell the crop in the market. The grandfather, who lives alone, after his only daughter abandoned him and moved to the city, and had not visited him for years, but he did not see well. One day, while the grandfather was returning from the village to his home, he heard screams in one of the houses on the road. The grandfather was very moved when he heard that woman's voice and felt that the woman was in pain. Then he approached the house and knocked on the door and stayed waiting. A collapsed young woman came and opened the door. Then the grandfather asked her about her condition and why she was screaming that way. The young woman refused to speak at first, but when the grandfather insisted, she told him that he had been assaulted 9 months ago by a group of young men. They were drunk, which caused her pregnancy, and she would give birth to her baby who did not know his father, which made her cry heartily. Pivonik became angry at what happened with the young woman, who was in her prime, and asked her to consider him like a grandfather and to allow him to enter to speak with her. The young woman agreed to enter the grandfather and brought him a cup of tea, then began to tell him what happened with her in detail. The young woman, called Svetlana, told the grandfather that she was an orphan, as her parents died while she was studying at the university after they had a traffic accident. It turned out that the house in which she lives was not owned by her father, but that it belonged to the uncle, who brought his family and asked her if she searched for another house. Then she had to rent the house in which she currently lives. Svetlana said that her suffering began when a young man disturbed her during the period that she was studying at the university. And when she refused to go out with him on a date because he was addicted to alcohol, he decided to take revenge on her, as one day he and his friends came to the house, and they rented in the village. Late at night, he and his friends assaulted her and left her bleeding on the ground, when a neighbor took her to the hospital. The young woman added that she had filed a complaint against these young men, and they were arrested and imprisoned. But 3 months after the incident, she made a medical examination, and the doctor told her that she was pregnant, which made her think about killing herself. When the young woman finished telling her story, and he told her that he would help her and not let her and her little one suffer, he gave her his home address and asked her to come at any time if she needed help. Pivonik kept visiting the young woman in her home and giving her money to eat well and buy the equipment she needed to receive the baby. The young woman gave birth to a beautiful child, whom she called Andrei. The grandfather, Pivonik, came daily to visit her and check on her, but the grandfather became unable to see well, which made him stay in his home, and he refused to visit Svetlana. The young woman recovered and went to the grandfather's house with her little one, where she used to leave Andrei with the grandfather and do some household work. As she washed the grandfather's clothes, brought him food, and cleaned the house. The young woman has come to consider the grandfather and considers him like her real grandfather, where the grandfather became very enjoying spending his time with the young child and his mother as they drink tea together, and the grandfather tells them some stories about the period he spent in the army and how he participated in wars and maneuvers. The young woman was very impressed with the wooden yard that the grandfather had built and asked him why he built it that way, but the grandfather didn't answer and told her that he would love for his whole house to be made of wood. One day, while the grandfather was sitting in the yard of the wooden house, accompanied by the little boy, he was playing with him and drinking tea, and he heard the sound of feet approaching him. They were strangers, and they asked the grandfather to allow them to sit so that they could relax. Grandfather did not see the faces of these men, but he was kind and offered to drink tea. When the young men noticed that the grandfather was blind, they began to implement their plan, waiting to kidnap the little boy and run away. Grandpa heard these guys' plan and then realized that they were planning to do something bad. Pavanik realized that the young men were attacking him. He took out his stick and asked them to retreat back. The young men refused to stop and approached the grandfather, as they wanted to steal the boy and then his mother and leave. Meanwhile, grandfather clapped, and a giant dog appeared and attacked these guys, forcing them to retreat back. Then the young men went inside the house and tried to enter to find the young woman, and when they approached the door, Pavanik clapped for the second time. Then the dog jumped into a red square. The color was painted in the wooden yard. Then the floor was opened and the young men fell into the hole in the middle of the courtyard, then closed the roof and returned as it were before. Then the dog went and stayed there. The young men remained inside that hole and asked for help. And in the meantime, Svetlana went out in panic and asked the grandfather what had happened. Then the grandfather told her that the young men came to his house and tried to take the little one, but he stopped them in his own way. The grandfather had put that trap when he restored his house, because he noticed that he was getting old and that there were thieves who realized that he lives in his house alone and his money there. So he decided to raise a dog in a secret way and put that trap at the door of his house to serve as an additional guard for him. The grandfather immediately called the police, and when the policeman came and took these guys out of the hole, she screamed, "Svetlana," because she recognized them. They were the same young men who had attacked her about a year ago and turned her life into hell. It turned out that they escaped from prison, and they only found Pavanik's house, which was isolated from the village and surrounded by trees. And when they reached it, they noticed Svetlana there. Then they thought about entering the house in order to kidnap the mother and her baby. After these escaped prisoners were brought back to prison, the grandfather offered to Svetlana to move in to live with him in the house. The grandfather told her that he was no longer able to take care of himself because he had almost blind, and he was admitted to her that he had become very much in love with her child and considered him like his grandson, and considered her like his daughter. Svetlana was very happy with the offer made by the grandfather, and she brought her things and began helping Pavanik with the dedication, leaving her son with him when she went out to the village to buy what she needed. The three started living together, as the grandfather gave birth to a new family after everyone abandoned him. While Svetlana regained her desire to live again, she decided to start a new page in her life and forget about that nightmare.
Thanks for watching. Please like and share the video in social networks. We'll be right back to you as fast as we can.